My name is Betty, and I'm 53 years old. Standing here in my new little rental apartment, I can't help but think about the choice I made 15 years ago that changed everything. I sold our family farm, the only home I'd ever known, to pay for my adopted son's college education. I never thought that loving a child so deeply could lead me to this moment. I never imagined that the boy I raised with all my heart would one day stand by silently while his wife humiliated me and threw me out of their home like I was nothing. Before I tell you how my own son allowed his wife to humiliate me and throw me out, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe. This story will show you that sometimes walking away is the strongest thing a mother can do. I became a widow at 35 when my husband died in a truck accident on Highway 27 during a winter storm. The farm in Iowa was all I had left, along with an emptiness that seemed to grow larger every single day. For 3 long years, I worked that land alone, tending to our corn and soybean crops, caring for our small herd of cattle. But the silence in our old white farmhouse was absolutely deafening. Every evening, I'd sit at our worn kitchen table and wonder if this solitary existence was all life had left for me. That's when I made the decision to visit Riverside Children's Home in town. I wasn't entirely sure what I was searching for, but something deep inside drew me there like a magnet. Among all the children playing in the common area, there was this 8-year-old boy with the most brilliant blue eyes who always had his nose buried deep in a book. His name was Marcus, and according to the social worker, he'd been abandoned as a tiny baby, passed from one foster home to another like an unwanted package. But Patterson told me he was incredibly shy and had serious trouble connecting with people after so many disappointments. The first time I approached Marcus, he barely lifted his gaze from his dinosaur encyclopedia. When I gently asked what he was reading about, he mumbled something about Tyrannosaurus Rex and quickly turned away from me. But there was something profoundly special about this child that reminded me of my late husband, David, the way he concentrated with such intense focus, the careful, reverent way he turned each page. I knew right then, with absolute certainty, that this remarkable boy was meant to be my son. The adoption process stretched on for what felt like endless months of paperwork, background checks, and home visits, but finally, at 38 years old, I brought Marcus home to our farm. Those initial weeks were incredibly challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. He was so terrified of everything, barely eating enough to keep a sparrow alive. I'd discover slices of bread carefully hidden under his pillow because he was genuinely terrified there wouldn't be any food available tomorrow. He'd lived in such uncertainty for so long that he simply couldn't believe this loving home was actually permanent. Gradually and patiently, I taught him everything about farm life. We'd walk together through our tall cornfields, and I'd show him exactly how to check if the corn was ready for harvest. He learned to gather warm eggs from our Rhode Island red chickens, feed our Yorkshire pigs their daily slop, and help me tend our thriving vegetable garden behind the house. Every single night, we'd sit together on our creaky front porch swing, and I'd read aloud to him until his eyelids grew heavy with sleep. The emotional breakthrough finally came 6 months after Marcus arrived at our farm. He had fallen hard while helping me repair a section of broken fence, cutting his knee quite badly on a sharp piece of old wire. As I carefully cleaned and bandaged his wound in our kitchen, he looked up at me with those incredible blue eyes filled with tears of pain and gratitude and whispered softly, "Thank you, Mom." It was the very first time he'd called me that precious word, and my heart nearly burst with overwhelming joy and love. For 10 absolutely wonderful years, we built an incredible life together on that farm. Marcus grew from that frightened, damaged 8-year-old into a smart, capable, hardworking young man who made me proud every single day. He helped me modernize various parts of our farming operation, learned to drive our old red pickup truck with the dented tailgate, and consistently excelled in every subject at school. His teachers constantly praised his remarkable intelligence and incredible work ethic during parent conferences. By his senior year of high school, Marcus had set his heart completely on studying mechanical engineering at Iowa State University. When Marcus burst through our kitchen door with that acceptance letter clutched in his trembling hands, his entire face was absolutely glowing with pure excitement, but I could clearly see the deep worry lurking in his eyes too. Iowa State University was expensive, really expensive beyond anything we'd ever dealt with. Tuition alone was $30,000 per year, and room and board added another $15,000. Books, supplies, and living expenses pushed everything together to about $45,000 annually. For a complete 4-year degree, we were looking at over $180,000 total. I sat at our scarred wooden kitchen table that night, going through our modest finances over and over again with increasing desperation. Our farm provided just enough income for us to live comfortably without luxury, but we'd never accumulated much left over for any kind of substantial savings account. I'd managed to put away what little I could over the years in a small savings account, but it wasn't even close to enough for college expenses. I looked around our comfortable home at the fertile black soil that had been in my family for 3 generations, and I knew exactly what I had to do. Marcus absolutely didn't want me to sacrifice everything for his education. "Mom, I can start at community college first, maybe earn some academic scholarships later," he said earnestly, but I could see the crushing disappointment clearly written in his expressive eyes. This wonderful boy who'd been given so very little in his difficult early life deserved every single opportunity I could possibly provide for him. Our neighbor Robert Thompson had been asking about purchasing our land for several years to expand his already substantial farming operation. When I finally called him with my proposition, he was genuinely surprised, but definitely interested in the possibility. After bringing in a professional appraiser, our farm was valued at approximately $200,000, which would be enough to completely pay for Marcus's entire education and leave me with a small financial cushion to start my life over somewhere else. The day I signed those legal papers was honestly one of the most difficult days of my entire life. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I wrote my signature across the bottom, literally signing away everything my family had built and worked for over decades. Marcus stood right beside me at the lawyer's office, tears streaming down his face, promising over and over that he'd make every sacrifice worthwhile, that he'd take complete care of me after he graduated and started his professional career. We packed up our belongings and moved to a small 2-bedroom apartment in town, and I immediately took a full-time job at Henderson's grocery store to pay our daily living expenses, while Marcus's college fund remained completely untouched for his education. It was a massive adjustment after living on our spacious farm for so many years, but seeing Marcus carefully pack his belongings for his freshman year made every single sacrifice feel completely worthwhile. During those first 2 years of college, Marcus faithfully called home every single week without fail. He'd tell me enthusiastic stories about his challenging classes, his inspiring professors, and how well he was performing academically. He came home every holiday and summer break, still my same sweet, thoughtful boy who insisted on helping me carry heavy groceries and always did dishes after every meal we shared. But somewhere during his sophomore year, something began to change in subtle ways. His weekly calls became less frequent and shorter, and when we did manage to talk, he seemed increasingly distracted and distant. He started mentioning new friends from wealthy families, exclusive parties at expensive venues, and an entire social world I'd never been part of or exposed to. I told myself this was completely normal and healthy. He was growing up and becoming independent, exactly what I'd always hoped and prayed for. The dramatic change became crystal clear during Marcus's junior year when he brought home his new girlfriend for Thanksgiving dinner. Amanda Richardson was everything I wasn't and had never been. She was 22 years old with perfectly styled platinum blonde hair, expensive designer clothes with obvious brand labels, and a kind of supreme confidence that immediately filled our modest apartment. She was the pampered daughter of a prominent corporate lawyer in the state capitol, and she made absolutely sure we both knew her impressive family background within the first hour. From the exact moment she walked through our apartment door, Amanda looked around our modest living space with barely concealed disgust and disdain. She commented critically on absolutely everything from the secondhand furniture we'd bought at estate sales to the simple home-cooked meal I'd spent hours preparing to even the family photos hanging on our walls. "Marcus, I honestly can't believe you actually grew up on a farm," she said with a cold laugh that felt like a physical slap across my face. "Thank God you're completely past that now." What hurt most deeply was Marcus's reaction, or rather his complete lack of any reaction whatsoever. He just smiled weakly and nodded along like he wholeheartedly agreed with her cruel assessment. This was the same boy I'd taught to appreciate simple pleasures, who used to love helping me plant vegetables and talking endlessly about the changing seasons. Now he seemed genuinely embarrassed by those precious memories we'd shared. Amanda was technically polite to me throughout the visit, but in that cold, distant way that made it perfectly clear she thought she was doing me an enormous favor by even acknowledging my existence. She never called me anything except Mrs. Henderson, even when Marcus specifically introduced me as his mom. During our Thanksgiving dinner, she talked constantly about her family's luxurious vacation home in the Hamptons, their exclusive country club membership, and all the important, influential people they knew personally. I watched Marcus hang on her every single word with obvious fascination, and I could see him changing dramatically before my very eyes. He started consciously correcting the way he spoke, deliberately, dropping the slight country accent he'd always had naturally. When he mentioned our life on the farm, he made it sound quaint and backward, something to be mildly amused by, rather than genuinely proud of. That weekend, I accidentally overheard Amanda talking to someone on her expensive phone in our guest room. "Yes, I'm finally meeting his adoptive mother," she said in a tone dripping with condescension. "She's sweet enough in her own way, but you can definitely tell she's just a simple farm woman. Marcus has really elevated himself tremendously. You should see how completely different he is from where he originally came from." The word elevated stuck painfully in my mind long after they left our apartment, as if loving him unconditionally, sacrificing everything for him, and raising him with strong values and genuine kindness was something he desperately needed to rise above, as if I was something shameful he needed to escape from completely. When Marcus graduated summa cum laude with his mechanical engineering degree, he immediately received a prestigious job offer from Morrison Engineering Firm in the state capital. I was so incredibly proud of his academic achievement, even though I knew it meant he'd be moving even further away from the simple life we'd shared together. At his graduation ceremony, I sat completely alone while Amanda's extensive family filled an entire row with their expensive cameras and designer outfits, taking countless pictures and talking about Marcus like he was already one of their own family members. Marcus and Amanda married the following spring in an elaborate ceremony at the exclusive Riverside Country Club that cost more than most people's annual salaries. I felt completely and utterly out of place among the wedding guests in their designer outfits and expensive jewelry that probably cost more than my car. The wedding expenses alone exceeded what I'd earned in 3 years working at the grocery store, and I couldn't help thinking about the farm I'd sold to give Marcus the education that brought him to this moment. During the reception, I sat at a table with distant relatives of Amanda's family people who barely acknowledged my existence throughout the entire evening. When someone politely asked how I knew the happy couple and I said I was Marcus's mother, they looked genuinely confused until Amanda's aunt quickly clarified, "Oh, you mean his adoptive mother?" The way she said it made it sound like I was some kind of charity case rather than the woman who'd raised him. Marcus and Amanda purchased a beautiful house in Oakwood Estates, an upscale neighborhood where houses started at $500,000. When they invited me for my first visit, I was absolutely amazed by the size and elegance of everything I saw. The kitchen featured granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that cost more than my reliable old car, and Amanda had hired professional interior decorators to make every single room absolutely perfect. 6 months after their wedding, Marcus called with what he enthusiastically presented as wonderful news for our family. "Mom, Amanda and I have been discussing this extensively, and we'd love for you to come live with us permanently. You could sell your apartment, save money on rent, and we'd have much more time together as a family." I was absolutely thrilled by this unexpected invitation. After feeling so distant from my son for so many months, the thought of being part of his daily life again seemed like a wonderful dream come true. I sold most of my furniture to a secondhand store, gave proper notice at my small apartment, and moved into their spacious guest room with such genuine hope filling my heart. But the harsh reality was nothing like what I'd imagined or hoped for. From my very first day in their home, Amanda made it perfectly clear that this was her house and I was just a temporary guest who'd somehow overstayed my welcome. She handed me a typed list of house rules I couldn't cook without asking her permission first because my country-style cooking made their house smell unpleasant. I couldn't do laundry except on Tuesdays between 10 and noon. I couldn't watch television in the living room because it was reserved for entertaining their sophisticated friends. Every single day brought new restrictions and limitations. Amanda complained loudly that I talked too loudly on the phone with my old friends from town. She said my clothes looked dated and inappropriate and suggested I might be more comfortable shopping at discount stores rather than accompanying her to upscale boutiques. When I offered to help with household chores, she told me they employed professional cleaning services and didn't need my inexperienced help. The worst part was watching Marcus go along with absolutely all of it without any protest. When I tried to talk to him privately about Amanda's increasingly unreasonable rules, he'd say, "Amanda has every right to run her own house exactly the way she wants, Mother." He'd even started calling me Mother instead of Mom, the formal name Amanda preferred because she said it sounded more mature and appropriate. I began to feel like a prisoner trapped in their beautiful home. I spent most days alone in the guest room reading library books or staring out the window at the small backyard garden I wasn't allowed to touch or tend. Amanda had told me they used expensive landscape professionals and didn't want anyone interfering with their carefully planned design. Everything came to a devastating head during Amanda's pregnancy announcement party 6 months later. She'd organized an elegant gathering with 50 of their closest friends, all successful young professionals, exactly like themselves. I wasn't included in any of the planning despite living in the house, and Amanda made it perfectly clear that I could attend as a guest, but I shouldn't expect to be involved in hosting duties. The house was filled with beautifully dressed people holding crystal champagne glasses and discussing their impressive careers, their substantial investment portfolios, and their exotic vacation plans to Europe and Asia. I sat alone in a corner chair wearing my best dress, which suddenly felt shabby and completely outdated compared to what everyone else was wearing. A distinguished woman with perfectly coiffed gray hair approached me, clearly curious about who I was and why I was sitting alone. "How do you know Marcus and Amanda?" she asked with polite interest. Before I could answer her question, Amanda suddenly appeared at my elbow with a bright smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Oh, that's Marcus's adoptive mother," she said in a tone that was sweet but somehow deeply condescending. "She used to run a little farm before Marcus rescued her from that life." The word rescued hit me like a devastating physical blow to my chest. Rescued. As if the 15 years I'd spent loving and raising Marcus, the family farm I'd sold to pay for his education, all the sacrifices I'd made were just some terrible situation he'd heroically saved me from. As if I was a pathetic charity case rather than the woman who'd given him absolutely everything. The distinguished woman looked at me with that particular kind of pity reserved for people you genuinely feel sorry for, and I felt my face burn with complete humiliation. Around the elegant room, other guests had clearly heard Amanda's comment, and I could feel their eyes on me, sizing me up as someone who obviously didn't belong in their sophisticated world. Marcus was standing just a few feet away near the marble fireplace. He'd heard every single word his wife said about me, seen the humiliation clearly written on my face, watched as his friends and colleagues looked at me like I was some kind of burden he'd been unfortunately stuck with. And he said absolutely nothing. He just smiled weakly and nodded along and let Amanda's cruel words hang in the air like they were perfectly reasonable. That night, I lay in the guest room and cried harder than I had since the day I'd signed away our family farm 15 years ago. I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd lost my son completely and permanently. The boy I'd raised who used to call me Mom and tell me he loved me every night had been replaced by this stranger who was genuinely ashamed of where he came from. 2 weeks later, Amanda made her final, devastating move against me. She knocked on my door one morning with another of her fake smiles and told me she needed to discuss something important. She was 4 months pregnant, she explained with obvious excitement, and she and Marcus had decided they needed the guest room converted into a nursery. "The baby will need a quiet environment," she said with false sympathy, "and we think it's best if you find your own place." When I looked desperately to Marcus for support, hoping he'd defend me or at least show some reluctance about throwing his mother out, he just nodded along obediently. "I think Amanda's absolutely right, Mother. It's time for you to be independent again. You're still young enough to build your own life." They gave me exactly 2 weeks to find somewhere to go and offered absolutely no help with the transition or moving expenses. After everything I'd given up for Marcus after selling my family's farm to pay for his future success, I was being discarded like an unwanted piece of furniture. But I didn't argue or fight back. I didn't beg or plead or try to make Marcus feel guilty about what he was doing to me. I just nodded calmly and started packing my belongings with quiet dignity. Something fundamental inside me had shifted during that humiliating party. I was done being treated like I was worthless, done accepting crumbs of affection from the son I'd sacrificed everything for. Marcus didn't help me pack a single box, didn't even offer to carry my belongings to the rental car I'd hired to move my possessions. At 53 years old, I loaded everything I owned into that small rental car while my son watched from his kitchen window, probably relieved to finally see me go. I found a modest one-bedroom apartment in Maplewood Gardens, a quiet neighborhood where rent was reasonable. Nothing fancy or impressive, but it was clean and peaceful and completely mine. For the first time in many months, I could finally breathe freely without walking on eggshells. As I unpacked my few remaining belongings, I came across an old metal box I'd saved from our farm days. Inside were important papers and documents I'd stored away and completely forgotten about. That's when I discovered the investment certificates that would change everything. When I'd sold our farm 15 years ago for $200,000, I'd used $180,000 for Marcus's education expenses. But I'd kept $20,000 completely secret money I'd invested in a small technology company called Technologic Solutions that looked promising at the time. I'd bought the stock at $2 per share and then forgotten about it completely as I focused entirely on supporting Marcus through college. I called my old financial advisor, Harold Mitchell, expecting to find the company had probably failed or that my small investment was worth maybe a few $100s after all these years. Instead, I discovered something that completely changed my entire situation. Technologic Solutions had grown exponentially over 15 years. Stock splits, mergers, and consistent growth had turned my $20,000 investment into $800,000. For the first time since leaving Marcus's house, I smiled genuinely, really smiled with pure joy. I had options now, choices I hadn't even dreamed of having. I could live comfortably for the rest of my life, or I could take a chance and try to build something meaningful with this unexpected windfall. The decision came to me as I was driving past our old farm one afternoon. Robert Thompson had aged considerably, and when I stopped to chat, he mentioned that farming wasn't as easy as it used to be with his arthritis. When I casually asked if he'd ever consider selling our land back, his eyes lit up with interest. "Betty, I'd be happy to sell it back to you, but land values have increased quite a bit since I bought it from you 15 years ago." He wanted $650,000 for the farm, more than triple what I'd originally sold it for, but it was still well within my financial means. 2 weeks later, I signed the papers to buy back my family's land. Coming home to that old white farmhouse was like putting on a comfortable old sweater after years of wearing clothes that didn't fit. I spent months renovating and updating absolutely everything. I installed modern irrigation systems, bought new farming equipment, and converted part of the land into an organic vegetable operation. I researched sustainable farming practices and discovered there was a growing market for locally grown organic produce among upscale restaurants and health-conscious consumers. Within 6 months, I had exclusive contracts with 5 high-end restaurants in the state capital, the same city where Marcus lived with Amanda. My organic vegetables were featured on menus that charged more for a single salad than I used to spend on groceries for an entire week. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now part of the upscale world that Amanda prized so much, but I'd gotten there through honest work and determination, not by marrying into it. I deliberately chose not to contact Marcus during this entire time. I wanted to see what kind of man he really was, whether he'd ever think to check on the mother he'd discarded so callously. 2 full years passed before Marcus finally found me. I was working in my greenhouse on a beautiful spring morning when I heard a car pull up our gravel driveway. Looking through the glass windows, I saw Marcus getting out of a beat-up sedan that was a far cry from the luxury BMW he'd been driving when I lived with them. He looked absolutely terrible. His clothes were wrinkled and unkempt, his hair uncombed, and he'd lost weight in a way that made him look hollow rather than healthy. When our eyes met through the greenhouse glass, I saw the boy I'd raised for just a moment, before the reality of what he'd become settled back over his features. "Mom," he said as I stepped outside, and for the first time in years, he used the word that had once meant everything to me. "I've been looking for you everywhere. I went to your old apartment, but they said you'd moved. I never thought to look here." I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at him carefully, this man I'd loved so completely, wondering what had brought him back to the place he'd been so eager to escape. Amanda left me, he said, finally, his voice breaking with emotion. She divorced me 6 months ago. She got half of everything in the settlement, including half custody of our son. I lost the house, most of my savings, everything. She said I was never good enough for her family anyway, that she'd settled for me and deserved better. The irony was bitter and complete. Amanda had spent years making him feel ashamed of his humble beginnings, convincing him that his worth came from what he owned and who he associated with. Now that he'd lost those external markers of success, she'd discarded him just as easily as they'd both discarded me. "I'm sorry about your marriage, Marcus," I said, and I genuinely meant it. Despite everything that had happened, I didn't take pleasure in his obvious pain. "But why are you here now?" He looked around the thriving farm, taking in the new equipment, the flourishing greenhouse, the obvious signs of prosperity and success. "I made a terrible mistake, Mom. I let Amanda turn me against you, and I've regretted it every single day since. I know I don't deserve it, but I was desperately hoping you might forgive me." I studied his face carefully, looking for any sign of the manipulation I'd seen so often when he was married to Amanda. But all I saw was genuine remorse and a man who'd finally learned that the values I'd tried to teach him mattered more than the superficial success he'd chased. "I don't hate you, Marcus," I said slowly and deliberately, "but I won't let anyone treat me like I'm worthless again. Not even you. You made choices, and those choices had serious consequences. You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to the way it was before." He nodded, tears starting to run down his cheeks. "I know. I don't know where else to go. I lost my job when the company downsized last month, and I can't afford the rent on my apartment much longer. I've been sleeping in my car some nights." Looking at him, standing there broken and desperate, I felt a mixture of complex emotions. Part of me wanted to take him in my arms and fix everything the way I had when he was 8 years old and afraid of everything. But I was a different person now, stronger and more sure of my own worth. "You can stay in the old hired hand's cabin," I said, finally pointing to the small building behind the main house. "It's small, but it's clean and warm. In exchange, you'll work on the farm. Real work starting at dawn and ending at sunset. You'll earn your keep, and maybe you'll remember who you really are underneath all the pretension Amanda filled you with." The relief on his face was unmistakable, but I held up my hand firmly before he could thank me. "This isn't charity, Marcus. This is a chance for you to prove that there's still something left of the boy I raised. If you can't handle honest work, if you're still looking for shortcuts or expecting special treatment, then you'll need to find somewhere else to go." Over the following months, I watched Marcus slowly transform back into someone I could recognize and respect. The physical work was incredibly hard for him at first. His hands, soft from years of office work, developed painful blisters and thick calluses. His back ached constantly from bending over crops, and he fell into bed completely exhausted every single night. But gradually, I saw glimpses of the boy who'd once helped me gather eggs and repair fences. He learned to appreciate the deep satisfaction of a good day's work, the simple pleasure of eating vegetables he'd helped grow, and the peace that came from living according to natural rhythms rather than artificial deadlines. One evening, as we sat on the porch after a long day of harvesting, Marcus looked at me with eyes that were clearer than they'd been in years. "I understand now why you loved this place so much," he said quietly. "I understand why selling it was such a tremendous sacrifice. I took everything you gave me and threw it away, chasing after things that didn't really matter." I didn't reply immediately. I was thinking about the difficult journey that had brought us both to this moment, the pain and loss that had taught us who we really were underneath all the expectations and pretensions. "I learned something important these past few years, Marcus," I said finally. "I learned that walking away isn't giving up. Sometimes it's the only way to find yourself again. Sometimes the people we love most need to lose us to understand our worth." He nodded, understanding in a way he never could have when he was living in Amanda's world of artificial values and superficial judgments. "Can you forgive me, Mom?" he asked, using the name that had once come so naturally to him. I looked at this man who'd been my son, who'd broken my heart completely, and who was slowly earning his way back into my life through honest work, and genuine remorse. I already have, I said, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You'll have to live with the choices you made, just like I had to live with mine. The difference is, now we both know what really matters in life. As the sun set over our farm, the farm I'd lost and fought to get back, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. I'd learned that love without respect is worthless, that sacrifice without appreciation is meaningless, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to fail and find their own way back to what matters. What do you think about my story? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved in order to find yourself again? Have you experienced betrayal from family members who forgot your sacrifices? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you and reminded you of your own worth, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Don't forget to hit that share button if you think someone else might need to hear this message about self-worth and standing up for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. Until next time, may you always know your worth and never settle for less than you deserve.